How you doing? It's Peter here from the Saltwater Edge, and sort of a new format for us. We're going to do a thing called the Captain's Corner. Sit down with Captain Ray Jarvis of Salt, Earth Sportfishing, over 20 years in the guiding game, and one of my favorite guys to fish with. So what we want to do here is have an inshore, light tackle, bottom fishing focused episode that sort of takes a look at what's now and what's next, and then we'll do this in a couple of different more times during this year, so you really have a good way to formulate your own game plan for those inshore anglers. So setting the scenario, it's early June. Today it's like 82 degrees out.
It's a hot one.
Yeah, and it was like slicked out this morning.
Yeah,
so
no wind.
That's different than we've had, right?
Yeah, it's been blowing lately.
Yeah, and so you talked, before we turn the camera on, you talked a little bit about how this spring, which has its own, been going for certainly a couple of weeks, month and a half. We're in a transition, but what was some of the highlights of the early part? And now you say that with this warmer weather, their fish are going to relocate a little bit.
Yeah, highlights have just been, the amount of bait we've had. So we've had a lot of big bait around.
Mm-hmm.
We've had, bunker in Buzzards Bay that we haven't really seen, pogies, menhaden, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And we haven't really seen them in numbers like we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
And we've had them kind of pushing into the bay, and with the cooler water temperatures, because we had a real winter last year, the bass have really kind of hung around rather than coming into the area and blowing through like they have in years past.
When it warms up, they move on.
Yeah, right.
I mean, same thing for Narragansett. Good, long, steady
and I
hold.
Our water temps out in the bay are still high 50s.
Huh.
So really keeping the bass local, and there's no reason for them to take off just yet. I mean, there's plenty of fish north, but
and there's plenty of food around.
Yeah, there's plenty of bait and good water temps, and we've had some great fishing. So.
In addition to the bunker, which kind of, I think of stripers, folks have listened before, have heard it before, but they arrive on bait, and then they sort of transition to structure for the summer, and then they move back onto bait, in faux fall when those mornings are cold, but the days are really nice.
When we have all that small bait flushing out.
Yep. So what other baits are around now?
So we've had worm hatches in the estuaries, and there's lots of like smaller bait, like whether it's juvenile sea herring or silver sides, other stuff like that. I won't necessarily list all the names, but you know what I mean, like small, silvery little bait fish. And we found fish in open water on all this small bait. We've also found fish in open water, popping pogies out left and right.
Yeah, I've had one of my mornings. I saw on my fish finder a collection of bait.
Yeah.
There was more in the middle of the water column. It wasn't, and I assumed it was kind of like silver sides or maybe those sea herring or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't the big baits. But it seemed odd for them to be suspended. But as I did a little bit more homework, I understood they're quite likely to be silver sides.
Right. Yeah, and we saw that for weeks on end. There was just a lot of small bait around, and predictably, you go see some birds working, and there's bass there, and there's small bait there.
What do you throw in that scenario?
In that scenario, we're throwing little things like surface erasers, not necessarily pink, but like white, silver. The sand eel color is great. It looks just like your relatively small bait fish.
Yeah.
Also, like little paddle tails, like the small 1 ounce pro tails are killer.
Sure.
Really just a simple retrieve, cast it out, and just slowly bring it back, let the paddle do the work.
Yeah, I was going to say, paddle wise, I think a bad habit of mine over time was too fast.
Yeah,
things just beating like a madman.
Or overworking it. Some people feel like they have to kind of jig it in the water column, and it's going to do that, but which seems like a great idea. But honestly, if you think about how a lot of these bait fish are fleeing, they're just kind of shooting off in a straight direction.
Yeah.
So I've noticed that just a straight retrieve and messing with your speed is really the key.
A little faster.
Yeah, a little faster, a little slower.
Yeah.
Probably one of my favorite baits in the springtime is just a Hoagie Original.
What's the 9?
That's the big one, the 9 or the 10. Yeah, I think it's the 10. Yep. And then they also make a 7. So either size. I like the bigger one in some situations because you get a little bit more action out of the tail.
Any suggestions on how to retrieve that? You and I fished together a year ago in that early spring, and you put on a clinic with that thing. And I tried to watch what you were doing, but you don't overwork it. It has a lot of life.
It does, and really it's just kind of like, not overworking it like you're saying, but letting it hit the water and giving it like these little sweeps, which will really put the action into that tail, and then giving it a pause. And when I pause it, I don't, just stop the rod. I kind of feed the rod back because a lot of the takes are going to be on that pause, and you almost want to give the fish just a second to inhale that bait. So, you'll get a lot of short hits if you sweep it and hold it, sweep it and hold it, rather just sweep it and kind of point back at your lure.
Let it stall.
Yeah, and that gives you just enough of a give to where as the fish takes it in, they're able to kind of suck it in there, and you get a good hook.
That's what they're
You're
doing,
able to
right?
come
They're
back.
Threading, flaring their gills behind
Yeah, and just kind
and
of
fall in.
sucking it in, yeah. And as you feed back, then you also have a little more range to give a solid hook set.
Good point. Good point.
so
How do you rig?
Weightless for the most part.
Okay.
Occasionally I'll put a small jig head on it, but I would say 95% of the time it's
Really
weightless.
nice in the top of the water column.
And Hoagie makes a good barbarian weightless hook with a little bit more of like a straight shank to it, and that one is really user friendly for people that don't fish a lot of soft plastics. It kind of tracks it nicely for you. Or I use the BKK Titans, I
Titan
believe.
liner.
Yeah. And those are awesome hooks, really strong. They hold up to big fish. And for people that are more familiar with soft plastics, you get a little bit more action out of it.
Got it. And is this a reaction strike, or do you think it's doing a good job of imitating bunker or something? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
I think a little
bit
like
of
a dock. They just everything eats it.
I think a little bit of both. In some situations, it's a good imitator of bait fish that's in the area.
Yep.
But I think it creates a natural reaction out of the fish. So if you're, I'm focusing on edges in the spring, flats to drop-offs, and really fishing those edges, and throwing these out there and just working them slow, like I said, but getting the action out of it. And the fish, it's like a natural
they're
instinct.
in there looking.
Yeah, they're already looking, and they see that, and they can't really say no to it.
Yep.
They'll at least come up and take a look at it. You get a lot of like swirls behind it and short hits, but again, that's why I really feed the rod back, because you will get some like curious looks at it, and if even if they're just a little curious and they open their mouth, sometimes it ends up in there.
Gotcha. So, one of the things that's for sure about the early season and been super popular this year is spoons. And you picked a couple of these as things that you're using.
Yeah.
And the spoon bite isn't over per se.
No,
right?
and I don't think it really ever ends.
No kidding.
I'll fish these as fish kind of relate to deeper, cooler water in the summer.
Yeah.
I'll still use them.
So you're out of a bay, because we're spotting Narragansett Bay, or a couple spots, and you could, Eric and I were out together, let's find them on the fish finder, and drop down to them. And super effective.
Right.
Some days more than others, but I think of it as a spring thing. You're saying you still get some love later in the year.
Oh yeah. This time of year around schools of pogies and whatnot, or even open water where we're seeing fish on bait up top, you'll mark some bigger fish down low, and I'll throw spoons down there, and you can really target some bigger fish by doing that. But as the summer goes on, fish are more out front rather than up in the bay.
Sure.
And we're fishing some ledges and things like that, like 50, 60
put in
feet.
my summer things to do.
Oh yeah, and so last summer, one trip in particular, we had a hard pick. There were some spots that I like to hit, predictably good spots.
Yeah.
Got a couple fish, but a slower morning. And I'm like, oh, let's go look in some deeper, cooler water.
Yeah.
Marked a bunch of fish down there, put spoons down. The first pass we did, we tripled up on really nice fish.
That's nice. Also, you got a pro tip there.
Yeah, so, your spoon is pretty simple, self-explanatory. A lot of times they come rigged with the hook straight to a split ring. And if anybody has ever fished a spoon, you notice a lot of vibration once you hook a fish. You almost feel it in the rod tip. You'll see like a chattering. And you tend to drop a lot of fish on the spoons because it is a single treble, and I feel like they get some leverage because this thing's pulling in the water and they're pulling another direction. So by putting a swivel between your first split ring, your second split ring, and your hook, you kind of eliminate some of that chatter and you land a lot more fish.
And the leverage. So I always got the impression even that they can pull it out.
Yeah, kind of like they do with
the dock.
That's why you honestly, in my opinion, you'll land more fish with a single hook on a dock versus having 2 big hooks, or you can put like a treble on the belly and a single on the back.
Yeah.
And they tend to get less leverage out of it that way.
Yeah.
But I've lost a lot of big fish because I've had 2 hooks on them.
Right.
Or like the Hoagie dog walker, same deal.
You see the dog hook.
Yeah, or I've even snapped plugs in half on really big fish, which is surprising, but it happens all the time.
So, I think that helped people with, some of the habits. And I always talk about how there's 2-week seasons. We've been in that one with the bigger baits up in the bay, and that's transitioning. It's not over, but don't get stuck up there. Don't stay up there too long.
Yeah, don't just stick to that all season.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've had around here, and I don't think I've used meat very far away, but Newport, great squid run.
Yeah.
And also in Buzzards Bay too.
Yep. Yeah. Lots of squid around. So any of the rips in Buzzards Bay, on the Elizabeth Islands, Vineyard Sound, all have squid right now. And every tide, those fish are kind of getting washed up and over ledges and sandbars and stuff. Wherever there's
ambush
a rip forming,
Yeah.
it's an ambush point for bass.
Yeah.
So really, it's honestly one of my favorite times of year.
Hallelujah. I totally agree.
It's so visual. It's so cool watching squid shoot out of the water and gulls excited and bass blowing up on them. And, again, in that situation, you can fish down with jigs, spoons, but you can also fish up top with.
So what's a jig for down for squid?
He makes a squino jig, which is like a small, a butterfly jig of
but
sorts.
also soft plastic.
Yeah, soft plastics with a little jig head like that. Killer.
Yeah,
it works really well.
And that's again you're staying tight, because this is just like with these spoons. Tension or slack is your enemy, right?
Right.
So you want to swing it over that reef.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Just as the squid would be pushed up.
Yep. And it tends to be, pretty short drifts if you're drifting. You want to set up on obviously the up tide of the ledge or the sandbar, whatever it may be, and get your baits down there and be ready as you kind of come up shallower. And in some situations, I've noticed fish will be in the front of it. But in some situations, they're on the back side of it, out of that current, just sitting there and ambushing bait as it washes over.
I don't have a lot of proof, but it seems like the smaller fish are in the front.
Yeah.
Grabbing, you're like, if it gets past that first little bit, this is my chance at a big.
Totally.
Yeah.
But like in my situation, I'm trying to put people on numbers and put them on fish, and a lot of the times, if I'm in a fleet, a lot of people will be right on the rip. And what I'll do is kind of go past that fleet a bit, even several hundred yards sometimes in front of that rip, and I find a lot of fish right in front of it.
Yeah.
So it's not, don't overlook the area well in front of it or well behind it.
I spent a lot of time in Watch Hill 20 years ago, and just remarkable, the whole scene, and you're absolutely right. There's a soft spot up ahead of the reef. There's the reef itself is just visually wild.
Yeah. I was fishing a spot on Memorial Day, and it's a spot that wasn't that hot and heavy in the past, but now, a few posts online, this and that, whatever, word got out. Now on the right days, there's a little bit of a fleet there. And everybody was right on the edge that day, and I was going up well ahead of the fleet, and
because they're still coming down.
Yeah, and we were kind of like tripling up, putting a few in the boat even before we got to the edge, getting those fish unhooked, putting it back down, and getting a couple more through the
way through. Yeah.
So
I was interested when we were prepping for this, the size of some of the lures you're using to imitate squid.
Yeah, so I'm not, some of the squid you see are bigger, the big tubes that are around, but a lot of the times I'm throwing like little stuff, like these little micro chugs from Hoagie.
I think they're called micro chugs.
And then, surface erasers
that
again.
An awesome algae lure as well.
Yeah, this is a great all-around lure. I mean, you can jig this for sea bass, throw it for stripers that are on squid. You can reverse the hook to the other side, and it swims totally different. And then also the small Hoagie dog walker is a great bait. And it's, a little bit bigger profile than that, but still...
Use that in the squid situation?
I do, yeah. Okay. White or amber or the pink, or like the orangey color like that.
Super Strike makes that trans amber color that I just like. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but it just gives me confidence around squid.
Yeah, totally. And I use this lure in a lot of different situations, whether fish are on pogies or they're on squid or even like sand eel type situations, I'm throwing like the more sand eel colored one.
Let me ask just a question that's sort of out of the blue here, but jumped in my head. When you start a charter, let's say you got 2 people on the boat.
Yeah.
What, and it could be, it depends. I don't want to turn it into a big long answer, but what do you start? What's the first couple lures that would go on? Does one guy get a stick bait and the other guy get a soft plastic? Or is there a logic you have to like,
like a little bit
search with?
I'll chat to people a little bit and kind of gauge where their skill level's at and you know, how much they fish, what kind of style they're used to doing.
Yep.
And in a lot of situations, especially early in the season, I'll turn them onto like a dog walking plug of some sort, whether it's a small one or a bigger one. And then also, you know, jigging, whether it's with a spoon or like a butterfly jig of sorts.
Yep.
And if they're, you know, if the bite is more on soft plastics, then that's what we're throwing. So really, you know, it really depends.
Okay,
and it changes trip to trip, but you know, regardless of your skill level, if the bite is on a certain thing, I'm going to teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the cool thing is, you know, if someone's not well versed or hasn't fished a lot, I can kind of really show them and show them the right way.
Yep.
You know.
So here we are in early June, and that was a great overview of the couple weeks that preceded and some of what's happening right now. What's next? What's the transition you're looking for? I felt like I was feeling one this morning with the heat. You know what I mean? Like this is gonna, you know, get the fish moving and maybe more settled on a kind of structure, maybe more towards evening.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, totally more structure based. So rather than fish coming and moving through here in big schools or biomasses, they're maybe setting up for their seasonal patterns. So now I'm kind of concentrating more on, you know, early morning, late in the day, fishing structure like boulder fields, you know, shallow ledges where you get kind of an upwelling. There's plenty of those around. I won't name any spots, but you know what I mean. You know, big rocks and open water where you get white water next to it. And if you've ever jumped in the water around any of those, you know the stripers are hanging down just a little ways and ambushing bait in that wash.
Yeah, they like that white water.
Yeah, almost
that's
like
when they have their powerful tail and they can have their way with it.
And just like a surf situation for surf guys, it's similar on the boat where you want to find that shallow water structure where they have a chance to ambush bait that's all confused in the wash and stuff like that. But also, you know, rips as well. The rips continue to fish decent through the middle of the summer, depending on what kind of bait's coming through and, you know, around at a certain time.
When do you see that squid run kind of taper?
Last year, I think it was like mid-July was like the end of it. So it really hangs in longer than people would think. And you know, I spend a lot of time on the Elizabeth Islands in Vineyard Sound, kind of down Woods Hole way. You know, I'm covering a lot of ground, but it's where the best bite is. So. And then as the summer moves on, I'm going more to the west in some deeper, cooler water. And kind of getting out of Buzzards Bay a little bit.
So as we talk about June, what else, you know, on your inshore guided trips, what are some of the other bait, game fish you pursue this time? Is something else rise up and like, hey, let's do some of this and then we'll go do some of that? Is that kind of what is it? So it's not striper, what is it? Bluefish, obviously.
Yeah, bluefish are great. We like to do a lot of like sight fishing for bluefish along the beaches this time of year. You'll get big blues that are in the area and, you know, sandy beaches, bright sunny days. You can kind of set up and just walk the boat along, you know, out maybe 50, 100 feet from the beach.
I'm flashing back to Napa Tree Beach.
And watching, you know, groups of like 6, 8, 10, whatever, how many bluefish, but big ones this time of year.
And they're just blowing by.
And they're cruising by, and man, if you lead them with any sort of plug, they turn on a dime, and it's very visual fishing, exciting.
It's great.
But also, you know, this time last year, we had a lot of bonito show up. And it was early, and it was good. And it, you know, I was like, oh, that's cool.
Bonus.
Not sure how long that's going to hang in there. They hung out until November. And already this year we've had some bonito show up. So it's early, but it's another option and something.
Any groundfish?
Yeah, so lots of sea bass. Sea bassing is awesome right now.
I don't have any, we don't think we have any kit for it.
No, but you know, actually these surface erasers are killer for sea bass. They are really
different, or you just leave one hook
I'll fish them just like that, you know, and send it down to the bottom. They sink really well. If you're in a heavier current, you're going to switch to something a little heavier. I really like the small, I think it's like an ounce or so, maybe ounce and a half squino jig
Yeah.
that Hoagie makes. And they have that like beaky flash on the hook.
Yeah.
But he also has patterns on them. You know, one's kind of glow
One's
colored.
bright,
Yeah.
and that's not the squid.
Right.
That is the squid, and the other one's the crab. And I do
Yeah.
both because I like the more muted ones sometimes and the bright ones
Yep.
sometimes.
But I'll, you know, if I'm taking a family out with some
Yeah,
young
exactly.
kids and they want action,
Yeah.
we're gonna go jig some sea bass. And you know, little kids pulling on a sea bass that's digging for the bottom, they love it. And
Yeah,
they can
yeah.
do it all day long.
Yeah.
But honestly, those little squino jigs are killer.
Yeah. Anything else you like to throw at sea bass? Do you do rigs?
I don't do rigs. I don't do any bait. I
Yeah.
do all artificial.
Yeah.
And you know, especially for sea bass, it's
Yeah.
it's all you need.
Yeah.
Simple jigs, and just finding the right structure and the fish. And you know, once you find that structure, just doing drifts over it. I'm not anchoring or anything like that. Fishing drop-offs, rock piles. You know,
And,
areas that hold them.
And then the bonito show up early, or at least they have. Maybe they hang, but
Yeah.
that'll be probably more of a July topic.
Yeah, I
We're
think so.
Looking at June,
Yep.
I'm hearing maybe a more focused effort on boulder fields and rips.
Yep.
Be ready to mix in some black sea bass on the way home. I think of
And Fluke. Don't overlook Fluke.
Yeah, why don't you, can you riff on that for a quick sec?
Yeah, you know, a lot of the time when we're jigging rips and stuff like that for stripers, especially sandy ones, you know, I'm jigging some spoons here and there, and I, you know, kind of weed out the small ones, but get some really big fluke on the spoons.
And so do you identify a sand bottom and focus on that?
Yeah, yeah. You know, in Vineyard Sound, there's a lot of those rips are sandy bottoms, so.
Okay.
Not so much in the islands, but in the Sound and a couple in Buzzards Bay, it really is sandy bottom.
Yeah.
And loaded with fluke.
And is there a time of tide and that kind of thing to?
You know,
I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah, yeah. You know,
do that this
I like the beginning and the end of the tide.
Yeah.
They're always better. Some days, you know, when that velocity really increases, the fish will come up top. Other days, they'll go down. Sometimes the beginning of the tide's all top water.
And you can do that without squid strips, stuff like that?
Yep.
You do it also?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, same idea.
cool.
You know, even like a bucktail behind like a three-way, or you could do a high-low rig with
Yeah.
2 bucktails or a
Yeah.
teaser above a bucktail.
And is the fluke season, the fluke fishing for you is sort of complements the other stuff, or do you do focused fluke trips?
I'll do focus fluke trips, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Is that in July now, or
that's pretty much now into July.
Okay.
And then, you know, I'm switching gears to other things like offshore stuff. but-
bluefin and everything else?
Yeah, but you know, I've done.
Lots to talk about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had days where we've kind of done some fluke fishing, some striper fishing, and some bluefin fishing. So,
Yeah.
you know, you're getting into some deeper, cooler water, and you kind of find the.
That's another transition,
Right.
Because you talked about the boulder fields and rips, and then
Yeah.
in time you're looking for deeper, cooler. Cool.
Absolutely.
Why don't we cut it at that then?
Yeah.
This is Captain Ray Jarvis of Salt of the Earth Sportfishing. You can reach him at jarvisfish@gmail.com or 401-269-1563, and we'll put all this in the show notes.
Cool.
But I hope we can get kind of a groove going here.
Yeah.
And I like this idea of Captain's Corner and sort of, you know, what's now and what's next, and help people maybe be a little bit more informed in their planning as their light tackle boat anglers.
Absolutely.
Thanks so
Sounds
much,
good.
man.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.